Welcome back to the psychology of the traitors, where we turn psychological theory into a winning strategy. This time we'll focus on detecting deception, what actually works, what doesn't, and the myths around deceptive behaviour. We'll examine how the traitors could exploit these flaws and which psychological strategies can help us to be an effective faithful. Before we get into it, let's get one thing clear. Spotting a liar is not easy, despite what you might hear other people say or what you might see on TV. In fact, we're actually pretty bad at it, with an accuracy rate of just 54%, only marginally better than chance. And accuracy does not necessarily improve in line with people's confidence in their ability to detect lies. So we should be pretty skeptical of those who make bold claims about the high confidence they have in spotting a lie. Those numbers don't necessarily also improve when we look at law enforcement professionals, with studies showing they do not reliably outperform non-experts. In fact, the more officers rely on stereotypical cues about lying, the worse they actually are. These findings should really teach us some humility about our ability to judge others' truthfulness at the round table. What makes matters worse is that in real life, police officers can strategically use evidence. They can control when and how this evidence is revealed. Key details are often held back and introduced later to test a suspect's story or catch their inconsistencies, which can help expose lies. In the Traitors, however, there's very little evidence to check accounts against, which makes using this strategy difficult. Okay, but perhaps we'll just be able to read other players' faces and behaviour to judge who is lying. For instance, beliefs about cues to deception have a long, rich history. Large survey data suggests that people frequently associate deception with gaze aversion, the tendency to look away. Other widely popular beliefs are that liars appear more nervous, fidgety, as well as more incoherent and less fluent in their communication. Interestingly, these cues of verbal fluency link back to our previous video on trust. But these beliefs are not strongly supported by evidence. For instance, research examining 158 cues to deception found that most did not reliably discriminate truth tellers and liars. While some cues did show some differences, for instance, liars are less forthcoming with their answers and provide fewer details. They also provide answers that are less plausible, logically structured, or include more discrepancies. And also liars appear more tense and have greater pupil dilation. But in general, these differences were often very small, making it in real-world terms actually practically difficult to use these reliably. Moreover, the idea that there might be a single universal cue to deception is just a fallacy. Deceptive behaviour does not look the same in everyone. Part of the reason why we are often such poor lie detectors is that we hold flawed assumptions about what differs a truth teller and a liar. One common belief is that lying is more anxiety-provoking, and this anxiety will leak out through behaviours such as fidgeting, nervousness, or in physiological responses which can be detected with tools like a polygraph. And you can see this line of reasoning in the show all the time. Contestants always point out that others appear nervous and tense, as if that reflects that they are hiding something. And look, what we're not saying is that lying sometimes, for some people, doesn't produce anxiety. For instance, the research earlier suggested that tenseness might hold some scientific merit. What we are saying though is that it doesn't really help discriminate truth tellers and liars very well, and in fact focusing on such cues can reduce accuracy rather than improve it. This is because anxiety-based approaches rest on a shaky theoretical ground, because truth tellers can just be as nervous as liars when under suspicion. For example, imagine being a faithful at the round table knowing your name has been circulating and that you might be banished. Wouldn't you be nervous despite knowing that you are being truthful? This problem is further amplified in the Traitors, where contestants are ordinary individuals placed amongst strangers, surrounded by cameras watching their every move, fully aware also that they're going to be on prime-time national television. A second common fallacy is consistency, another trait we discussed in our trust video. We often assume that liars will slip up over time and give inconsistent answers because they're making it up. However, research does not support this intuition. In fact, studies suggest that liars and truth tellers do not reliably differ on consistency, and if anything, high consistency can sometimes be more indicative of deception than honesty. This is because liars tend to repeat the same rehearsed story each time they're questioned, meaning they tend to not offer new details. However, truth tellers reconstruct events from memory. As memories are recalled, additional details are added or slightly altered, making truthful accounts appear less consistent over time. So if consistency and anxiety are not that helpful, then how might we detect a traitor? Well, perhaps a more reliable approach is that of cognitive load. Now, cognitive load is just really a fancy term for saying how much your brain can really handle at once. The point in regard to deception, though, is that lying may be more cognitively demanding than telling the truth. This is because a liar has to actively come up with a lie, whereas truth tellers simply recall what happened. Lying also requires us to suppress the truth, which further uses up valuable cognitive resources. Additionally, liars are usually more concerned about their credibility not being taken for granted. As a result, they spend extra mental effort monitoring and controlling their own behaviour to appear honest, while also closely watching the person they're speaking to for signs that they're being believed. Truth tellers, on the other hand, typically don't do this. We just assume that we'll be believed. Now, as we said, there's only so much our brain can handle at once. Liars can try to reduce this cognitive load of deception by rehearsing their story, but as faithfuls, we can do the opposite and try to deliberately increase it. By pushing cognitive load to its limits, we reduce the mental resources available to lie effectively. One simple way to do this is to increase the difficulty of responding. For instance, research has shown that asking someone to describe events in reverse order increases the ability to detect liars from truth tellers. Another effective way to increase cognitive load is by asking unanticipated questions. When people lie, they often rehearse answers to the questions that they expect to be asked. If instead we ask questions that they're not prepared for, liars are then forced to generate new details on the spot, details that were never part of their original script. For faithfuls, this means moving beyond the obvious questions and getting a little more creative in how we probe others. In the castle, players openly discuss their suspicions and roundtable strategies, effectively giving the traitors advance notice of what to expect. This allows them to rehearse convincing responses ahead of time. Holding suspicions back, therefore, until the round table may therefore be more effective. While this approach is not foolproof, it is far more likely to succeed than relying on cues such as nervousness or consistency. So, what does this all mean for our strategy? Well, if we assume that the average contestant holds common stereotypes about what deception looks like, then as a traitor, the goal is to avoid doing anything that appears to confirm those beliefs, even if those actual behaviours have nothing to do with lying. This means staying consistent in how you present your story, remaining calm and confident when questioned, and maintaining eye contact rather than avoiding someone's gaze. Even if these actually aren't reliable cues, we want to blend in, and so avoiding these cues may help us fly under the radar. We might also want to redirect attention to other players who exhibit these cues, knowing that these cues might resonate with the gut intuitions of other contestants. If we're playing as a faithful, however, we need to be far more cautious and avoid falling into these common misconceptions. This means being aware of our own limitations in our ability to spot lies, as well as others, even if they claim to have expertise. Instead, we should remain open-minded about what deception may actually look like, rather than fixating on specific cues. And we may also want to ensure that our questioning of others is cognitively demanding. Primarily, this might be by reducing the opportunity for traitors to rehearse their answers, whether by holding our cards close to our chest until the round table, and also by asking a lot of unanticipated questions. These might serve us a better chance of sniffing out a traitor. Of course, we should appreciate that deception detection really is a tool that is best served alongside evidence. And although evidence is pretty hard to come by in the Traitors, we rarely see faithfuls in the show actually trying to meaningfully get to grips with the evidence they could actually study. Voting patterns, alliances, who were murdered individuals particularly suspicious of. Or take, for example, the task from the most recent season of the Traitors UK, where the Traitors had to secretly mark other players' portraits with a red dot to indicate they were up for murder. We see very little effort by the faithfuls to piece together a reliable timeline of when this might have happened, and then subsequently getting players to systematically account for their movements around the castle during this window, and seeing who could verify it. This kind of missed opportunity highlights how rarely faithfuls exploit verifiable information, even when the game briefly provides it. And ultimately, we may need to do much more homework on these sorts of things, and much less on reading body language, if we want to be successful in identifying the traitors. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and appreciate the work we're doing, please do give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. It really does help us out.